Imagine realizing that your pursuit of spiritual enlightenment, the meditation, the mindfulness retreats, all those profound books you read, is actually just a highly sophisticated form of self-deception.
Oh man, yeah, that is a terrifying thought to start with.
Right. But today, we are opening a previously translated spiritual text that makes exactly that claim.
Hmm.
It suggests that the very moment you feel proud of your spiritual progress or the moment you think you are safely insulated from the chaos of the world, you have fundamentally failed.
Completely failed. It's a very uncompromising standard.
Yeah, we are exploring a landscape of personal commitments where the goalposts are entirely internal and where standing completely still is judged as a catastrophic retreat. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
So, we're looking at a document titled The Meaning of the 10 Great Vows, or texts. We're going to explore what it actually means to make a promise to yourself, to your community, and the universe when a simple pass-fail grading system no longer applies.
And, the historical and philosophical gravity of this text, it really cannot be overstated. We are looking at a framework emerging from the White Sun era teachings.
Right, the White Sun era.
Yeah, and this isn't a manuscript designed for ascetics hiding in caves or monks completely divorced from society. The mandate here is specifically designed for what Buddhist cosmology terms the fire dwelling. The
Just
fire.
dwelling. I love that term.
Hmm.
It perfectly describes the burning house of everyday human existence.
It really does.
It's the realm of paying taxes, dealing with office politics, navigating traffic, facing the relentless pressure of societal expectations. We usually think of spiritual teachings as a fire escape.
Like a way to get out of the burning building and find peace on a mountaintop.
Exactly. But this text, it instructs the practitioner to walk straight into the flames.
Yeah, it represents a radical democratization of spiritual practice. Historically, profound spiritual cultivation was largely a privileged endeavor,
Right, you had to have the money or the time.
or the societal support, or just the sheer singular obsession to step outside the normal bounds of civilization. What this teaching does is blend the vast universal compassion of Maitreya's Pure Land with the highly pragmatic, socially engaged ethics of Confucianism.
So it's incredibly practical.
Yes. The objective is not to evacuate the burning house. The objective is to build a great harmony world, a lotus land, right directly in the center of the inferno.
Which, I mean, that creates an immediate logistical and psychological problem.
Oh, absolutely.
If you have everyone, from a deeply stressed middle manager dealing with the supply chain crisis to an enlightened sage, all attempting to practice the exact same vows inside that fire dwelling, how do you even measure success?
Right, because the baselines are so different.
Exactly. And the source text resolves this by introducing a structural hierarchy of capacity. It acknowledges that not everyone is starting from the same baseline, dividing the practice of every single vow into 3 roots.
The lower root, the middle root, and the upper root.
Yeah. And how should we understand the word root here?
Well, root here shouldn't be misinterpreted as a rigid caste system or some permanent biological limitation. It's really a diagnostic framework.
Okay, a diagnostic framework.
Yeah, the lower root is fundamentally behavioral. The middle root is ethical and practical. And the upper root is purely philosophical and absolute.
You know, thinking about this through a linguistic lens makes it much clearer to me. If these vows were a new language, the lower root is learning the foundational vocabulary.
Just trying to get by.
Yeah, you memorize how to ask for directions, how to order food. It is highly functional. The middle root is mastering the grammar and syntax. You understand the structural rules of the language and can hold a fluid, complex conversation.
Right, they're fluent.
Exactly. But the upper root is writing abstract poetry. You are bending the language, living inside of it, using it to express ineffable truths.
That's a great analogy. All 3 people are technically speaking the exact same language, but their relationship to the words is entirely different. The expectations placed on the tourist asking for the train station, they are fundamentally different from the expectations placed on the poet. As we analyze these 10 vows, the text demands that practitioners ruthlessly self-diagnose.
They have to be honest with themselves.
You have to know whether you are struggling with basic vocabulary or whether you are attempting to write poetry, because the criteria for failure shifts drastically depending on your capacity.
So keep your own life and your own major commitments in mind as you listen to this deep dive. Before anyone can attempt to change the world or build a lotus land in the fire dwelling, the first necessary action is internal grounding.
You have to stabilize the individual mind.
Right. And section 1 of our text deals with this foundation. Vow number 1 is sincere devotion.
Sincerity seems like a straightforward concept, right? But the text dissects it across the three capacities. For the lower root, sincerity is defined as authenticity.
Okay,
It
authenticity.
is the refusal to seek false fame. It is the rejection of superficiality, driven by a profound fear of deceiving oneself or others.
It's grounded in basic honesty, then. I mean, the ego desperately wants to appear spiritual or competent or peaceful to the outside world.
Oh, constantly.
The lower root practice is the simple brute force mechanism of catching yourself when you are performing for an audience and choosing to just, drop the mask.
Yeah, just being real. And then moving to the middle root, sincerity transforms from an internal state into an operational protocol. The text describes it as humbly doing all good and avoiding all evil.
It becomes action-oriented.
Exactly. It is taking that internal honesty and turning it into a consistent behavioral output. The middle root has internalized the vocabulary and is speaking the language fluently through daily choices.
They are no longer just avoiding hypocrisy, they're actively pursuing an ethical framework in their interactions.
Right. But the upper root, they completely shatter the conventional understanding of the word. For the upper root, sincere devotion is described as achieving wu wei, effortless action or non-action.
Effortless action.
The text claims they possess a mind completely unattached, untiring, and completely unmoved by good or bad circumstances.
Okay, wait, and this is where the philosophy risks alienating a modern practitioner, I think.
How so?
Well, if you are completely unmoved by good or bad circumstances, that sounds dangerously close to sociopathy, or at the very least, severe emotional detachment.
I see what you mean.
If my closest friend experiences a tragedy, I should be deeply moved to comfort them. If I witness systemic injustice, I should be moved to anger and action. How does the text reconcile sincerity with a lack of reaction?
That's a really common hurdle. The translation of unmoved frequently trips up Western readers because we equate emotional reactivity with moral care.
Right, if you don't cry, you don't care.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We assume that if you're not visibly devastated by a tragedy, you do not care about it.
Yeah.
But the upper root description is not advocating for apathy.
Okay.
Apathy is the cessation of care. It is a defensive disconnection from the fire dwelling. What the text describes is unshakable stability. Sincerity at this level means your internal compass is so flawlessly calibrated to universal truth that external chaos simply cannot alter your fundamental state of being.
Oh, I see. So the distinction is between stability and numbness. Like, if we look at advanced systems engineering, you might build a ship with a highly sophisticated gyroscope.
Okay, yeah.
The ship is still navigating the ocean. It is still getting hit by massive rogue waves, the bad circumstances. It is still gliding through calm, sunlit waters, the good circumstances. But the gyroscope inside remains perfectly level.
It registers the movement of the ship, but it does not succumb to it.
Exactly.
That captures the physics of the upper root perfectly. The practitioner registers the tragedy. They act with deep compassion to comfort the friend or fight the injustice. But their internal state is not held hostage by the changing weather.
That is profound.
And crucially, it protects against the good circumstances as well. External praise, financial success, social adoration, none of that can inflate the ego and knock the gyroscope off balance. True sincerity is maintaining that absolute equilibrium regardless of the environment.
But there's a trap here, isn't there? Once the upper root establishes that unshakable sincerity, once they calibrate that internal gyroscope, they suddenly possess a spotless mirror.
Oh, right.
And what happens when you look into a spotless, perfectly still mirror? You immediately see every single speck of your own dirt.
You see everything.
The sincerity forces a crisis of conscience. How does the practitioner survive seeing their own flaws without drowning in guilt and self-loathing?
Well, that survival mechanism brings us to vow number 2, which is true repentance, or true repentance.
The progression of how we face our flaws is one of the most psychologically astute portions of the text. For the lower root, the text acknowledges a severe cognitive blind spot. Human beings frequently do not realize when they are causing harm.
We are oblivious. So, lower root true repentance is defined simply as courageous adaptation. The moment an external source, a friend, a teacher, a colleague, points out a mistake, The lower root practitioner immediately changes course rather than attempting to save face.
We see the failure of this constantly in corporate environments or, personal relationships. Someone is confronted with a minor error, and instead of saying, I see the mistake, I will fix it, their ego deploys a massive array of defensive maneuvers.
The walls go up immediately.
Yeah, they twist logic, they blame external factors, or attack the person pointing out the flaw, all to protect their self-image. The lower root is simply the discipline of overriding that defensive reflex.
Moving to the middle root, repentance becomes proactive rather than reactive. The middle root doesn't wait for a colleague or a teacher to point out the flaw. They engage in rigorous, continuous self-reflection.
They're looking for their own blind spots.
They are actively hunting for their own behavioral gaps, and they refuse to hide their faults from the community. It is the continuous maintenance of the ethical machine.
But the upper root, they redefine the very ontology of repentance, don't they?
They really do.
The text states that for the upper root, true repentance is having a mind so purely aware that discriminatory thoughts, wrong views, and evil thoughts never even arise to begin with.
The psychological implications of that are just staggering.
I mean, let's challenge the mechanics of that, though. From a neurobiological perspective, human brains are prediction engines.
Right.
They constantly generate thoughts, biases, and reactions based on past trauma and pattern recognition. How can a practitioner possibly monitor and stop a thought before it arises without experiencing massive cognitive overload and burnout?
It sounds impossible, right?
But to understand the mechanism, we have to look at how the text reconceptualizes the word repentance. Traditional frameworks view repentance as a backward-looking emotional transaction.
Like saying sorry after the fact.
Exactly. A sin occurs, guilt is generated, forgiveness is requested, and equilibrium is restored. It requires the harm to have already manifested.
So it's purely retroactive. Yes. But the upper root shifts repentance into a state of present moment, preventative mindfulness. It is not about constantly monitoring the brain with a club ready to smash a bad thought.
Okay.
It is about fundamentally altering the soil of the mind. Through the deep stabilization we discussed in Vow 1, the neural pathways associated with greed, anger, or prejudice, they simply atrophy from lack of use.
Oh, wow.
The mind becomes so vast and clear that when the subtle seed of a wrong view approaches, it finds no fertile ground. It dissipates into the void before it can coalesce into a conscious thought, let alone an action. The repentance is the maintenance of the environment that refuses to grow the weed.
So the apology is built into the architecture of the mind itself. If you maintain a cloudless sky, you never have to apologize for the rain.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
That is an incredibly high bar. And frankly, once you realize the magnitude of what the upper root requires, the human ego panics. The ego realizes it is facing an existential threat. It will not survive this process.
It fights back.
Which brings us to section 2, the traps of ego and stagnation. Because the moment you commit to this level of sincerity and preventative repentance, the mind immediately sets up sophisticated roadblocks.
The ego is infinitely adaptable. If it cannot convince you to abandon the spiritual path entirely, it will convince you to weaponize it.
Yeah, which leads directly into vow number 3, against hypocrisy or falsehood. The literal translation hints at a hollow heart and fake intentions. The text defines this hypocrisy fundamentally as ignorance, specifically the ignorance of not seeing one's own true nature.
Right.
Let's look at the lower roots struggle with this. The text warns them against using the spiritual path merely to pass the time or to put on a show.
This is the commodification of spirituality.
We see this everywhere today. It's the individual who adopts the aesthetic markers of the practice without engaging in any of the psychological labor.
The yoga mat as an accessory.
Yes. They buy the expensive meditation cushions, they master the jargon, they curate a social media presence built around the aesthetics of mindfulness, but they never actually sit with their own discomfort. They are using the path as an accessory to decorate their ego, rather than a scalpel to dissect it.
The lower root's hypocrisy is entirely performative. The form is present, but the substance is hollow. For the middle root, however, hypocrisy is much more insidious. It manifests as a schism between intellect and application.
Between what they know and what they do.
Exactly. It is the gap between words and actions. The middle root has the grammar. They can debate the texts, they understand the philosophical nuances, and they can deliver a beautiful lecture on compassion.
Right.
But when they leave the lecture hall and re-enter the fire dwelling, they scream at the barista who gets their coffee order wrong. They possess intellectual understanding, but it hasn't penetrated their autonomic nervous system.
They haven't embodied it.
And then we reach the upper root, The text demands that the upper root must actively use the prajna dharma wheel, the wheel of wisdom, to crush even the most subtle, hidden evil thoughts.
Crush them.
Yeah, hypocrisy for them is not an outward display. It is a microfraction of a second where their internal state misaligns with ultimate truth, even if no one else ever sees it.
How does the Prajna Dharma wheel actually function in practice? Because crushing a thought implies violent resistance. And psychological studies tell us that actively trying to suppress a thought, the classic don't think of a pink elephant problem, only makes the thought more resilient.
This just makes it stronger.
Right. So how does the upper root crush a thought without creating a massive internal conflict?
The translation of crushing can be misleading if we envision it as a hammer. The Prajnadharma wheel is the mechanism of ultimate insight into emptiness. It doesn't crush the thought by opposing it with equal force.
Okay, then how?
It crushes the thought by shining the light of wisdom directly onto the structural integrity of the thought itself. When you observe an ego-driven impulse with absolute, unblinking clarity, you realize it is entirely composed of empty, fleeting phenomena. It has no actual mass.
I see. So it's not hitting a brick wall with a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
It's turning on the lights in a dark room and realizing the monster in the corner is just a pile of laundry.
Exactly.
The illusion crushes itself under the weight of observation.
Precisely. The upper root's hypocrisy would be noticing the pile of laundry and choosing to pretend it is still a monster because they enjoy the drama of the fear. They must use a prajna wheel to constantly illuminate the room.
But the relentless vigilance required to constantly illuminate that room, to constantly confront the illusions of the ego, leads directly to exhaustion. Which brings us to vow number 4, against retreating or shrinking back.
Because when the friction of the fire dwelling becomes overwhelming, the most natural human instinct is simply to quit.
To give up. And quitting looks different at every level of capacity, doesn't it?
It does. For the lower root, retreating is characterized by inconsistency. The text calls it hot and cold faith.
Hot and cold.
It's the surge of intense motivation that leads someone to meditate for 2 hours a day for a week, followed by complete abandonment of the practice for 6 months.
Oh, I've definitely been there.
We all have. For the middle root, retreating is defined as failing when the actual trials of life materialize. It is relatively easy to maintain ethical composure when the market is up, your health is good, and your relationships are stable.
Sure, when things are easy.
The middle root practitioner is tested when the environment turns hostile. If a sudden financial ruin or a deep personal betrayal causes them to abandon their ethical framework and revert to ruthlessness or despair, that is the retreat.
But the upper root definition of retreating fundamentally alters the physics of the spiritual path. The text states that for the upper root, simply failing to diligently advance in patience, precepts, giving, and wisdom is considered moving backward.
At the apex of practice, standing still is functionally identical to retreating.
I have to play devil's advocate here, because this sounds like a recipe for severe spiritual burnout.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, in physical kinesiology, muscles do not grow while you are lifting the weights, they grow during the rest periods. In cognitive science, the brain requires massive amounts of downtime, sleep, unstructured wandering to consolidate memories and learn.
Sure.
If we demand constant, diligent forward motion from the upper root, aren't we just mapping toxic hustle culture onto spiritual enlightenment? Why is rest categorized as a retreat?
It is a critical distinction to make. The forward motion demanded of the upper root is not muscular white-knuckled strain. It is not the hustle of forcing outcomes. We have to return to the concept of the fire dwelling.
The burning house.
Right, and the fire dwelling is a high-entropy environment. Physics dictates that closed systems naturally degrade into disorder unless energy is continuously applied. The human mind, immersed in the chaotic stimuli of modern society, is constantly subject to the entropy of distraction, greed, and fear.
So the current of the river is always moving backward.
Exactly. If you stop swimming, you do not stay in the same place on the river. The current pushes you downstream.
Right.
But the swimming of the upper root is not frantic thrashing. Remember vow 1? They operate in a state of wu-wei, effortless action.
Right, the non-action.
Their forward motion is a state of unbroken flow. If they wake up and say, I have achieved perfect patience, I no longer need to cultivate it, that complacency allows the entropy of the world to immediately begin eroding their patience.
Ah, I see.
Rest, in the biological sense, is necessary. But philosophical complacency, the belief that the work is finished, is the ultimate retreat.
The work is never done. which is terrifying to the ego that wants a finish line, but deeply liberating to the spirit because it means the goal is the process itself. You are never arriving, you are only ever refining.
That's a great way to summarize it.
But this refining process does not happen in a vacuum. We do not navigate the river alone. This transitions us to Section 3, Lineage and Humility. The text insists that internal psychological work is insufficient if we do not properly orient ourselves to the social and historical structure of the path.
Because we are social creatures operating in a continuum of history, the teachings we rely on did not materialize out of thin air. They were preserved, often at great cost, by those who came before us.
Navigating respect for our teachers and our lineage while maintaining our own autonomy is a massive point of friction for modern practitioners. Vow number 5 addresses this directly. It is titled, Against Deceiving Masters and Destroying Ancestors, EU.
It is an intensely heavy, archaic-sounding title.
Let's look at the requirements, because I anticipate a lot of resistance to this from you, the listener. The lower root is instructed to respect the specific physical individuals guiding them, the transmitting masters, the lecturers.
Right.
The middle root is explicitly warned against leaving the enlightened master's lineage to join another sect or another dharma abode.
And there is the friction point.
Yes. Because to a modern, highly individualistic listener, this sounds indistinguishable from institutional control.
It sounds like corporate retention.
Yeah, it sounds like middle management saying, do not look at our competitors' products, do not leave our walled garden, or you are committing a spiritual sin. How do we engage with this source material without validating cult-like organizational loyalty?
If we only read the lower and middle roots, it is very easy to interpret this vow as a mechanism for institutional preservation. Human beings constantly attempt to build fences around the ineffable to maintain control and hierarchy.
We love a walled garden.
We do. But the framework demands we look at the upper root to locate the philosophical core of the vow. The upper root always strips away the sociology and reveals the mechanism.
The text states that for the upper root, deceiving the master is defined as the inability to grasp the patriarch's true heart or failing to represent heaven in spreading truth.
What is conspicuously absent from that definition?
There is no mention of the institution. There is no mention of blind obedience to a human administrator.
Exactly. For the upper root, the master and the ancestor are not historical personalities. They are not brands. They are the embodiments of the truth itself.
Wow.
The lineage is merely the vehicle that carries the fire across generations. The teachers are the torchbearers. The failure of the upper root is not a failure of organizational loyalty. It is a failure of transmission.
So if a teacher hands you a map that leads out of suffering and you ignore the directions on the map, but spend your life praising the quality of the teacher's handwriting and defending their organization against rival map makers, you have completely deceived the master.
Yes.
You have missed the point of the transmission entirely.
You have destroyed the ancestor's intention. The lower root might require the rigid scaffolding of institutional loyalty just to learn basic discipline and focus. But the ultimate demand of the upper root is absolute fidelity to the universal truth.
To the truth, not the building.
Right. If an institution begins to obscure that truth, the upper root practitioner's loyalty belongs to the truth, not the building.
Which flows seamlessly into the concept of historical continuity in vow number 6, against despising predecessors. This isn't just about the immediate teacher, it is about the entire generational chain.
For the lower root, the failure is simple arrogance and basic disrespect for elders. For the middle root, it is the failure to actively carry out the specific goals, the spreading of dharma and cultivation of virtue, left unfinished by the predecessors.
But the upper root carries an immense existential weight. The text states that the upper root fails if they do not shoulder the historical burden of all past sages to keep the fire of truth burning. They must inherit the past to open up the future.
It is the rejection of chronological snobbery.
I look at this through the lens of scientific advancement. Thomas Kuhn's theory of paradigm shift shows us that science doesn't just linearly progress. It builds upon and eventually shatters previous frameworks. But if a young, brilliant physicist enters the academy and says, Newton and Einstein were primitive fools, I am ignoring everything they wrote and starting entirely from scratch, they aren't being innovative. They are being arrogant, and they will fail because they refuse to stand on the shoulders of giants.
True innovation requires a profound comprehension of the existing foundation. Despising the predecessors is severing the root of the tree you are attempting to harvest fruit from.
We see this in social and political spheres as well. The freedoms and comforts we casually enjoy today, civil rights, labor laws, freedom of speech, were purchased with the blood and sheer endurance of predecessors.
Absolutely.
To despise them, or merely to be indifferent to their sacrifice, is a form of spiritual amnesia. What the upper root realizes is that passive gratitude is insufficient. You cannot just say, thank you, to history.
It's an active process.
You honor the predecessors by taking up the burden. You maintain the fire so that you can become a reliable predecessor for the next generation.
You become a link in the chain rather than the terminal endpoint.
So, having established our internal equilibrium, battled our hypocrisy, and oriented ourselves within the historical lineage, we enter section 4. This is where the abstract philosophy hits the pavement in the fire dwelling.
The rubber meets the road.
Exactly. How do we interact with the boundaries, the rules, and the outreach of the path? Vow number 7 is, against disobeying Buddha's rules, start in GA.
Rules are the operating system of a community. They prevent the collective from collapsing under the weight of individual egos.
For the lower root, the rules are primarily aesthetic and functional. Don't be disruptive in the temple, dress appropriately, observe basic etiquette.
Very simple.
For the middle root, the rules expand into comprehensive structural ethics. They adhere to the 5 constants, the 5 precepts, and the 10 good deeds. It is a rigid moral code designed to limit harm.
Right.
But the upper root, the text says the upper root disobeys the rules if every single thought, step, sitting, or sleeping posture fails to perfectly align with the principle of harmony, or zongye.
Zongyi translates to centrality and equilibrium. It is the perfect balance of internal state and external expression.
How does an external rule like do not steal or do not lie transform into a way of sleeping or walking? I mean, how do you sleep ethically?
Think about a master musician. When you first learn to play the piano, the rules of music theory, scales, time signatures, chord progressions are external constraints. You have to consciously think about where to place your fingers to avoid breaking the rules.
That is the middle root.
Yes. But after decades of relentless practice, the rules bypass the conscious intellect and embed themselves in the autonomic nervous system. The master musician does not think about the rules of a C major scale. Their hands simply move in perfect harmony with the architecture of the music.
They don't follow the rules, their physical expression becomes the rule.
Exactly. For the upper root, the ethical precepts are no longer external laws to be obeyed. They are the baseline rhythm of their biology. If their posture or their breathing falls out of harmony, they have broken the rule because they have lost their alignment with the Tao.
Which sets the stage for the most intense philosophical tension in the entire document. We have to examine Vow 8 and Vow 9 simultaneously because on a literal level, they are a complete catch-22.
They really are.
Vow 8 is against leaking heavenly secrets ote, and Vow 9 is against hiding the Tao.
It is the paradox of esoteric transmission. Keep the secret, but do not hide the path.
Let's break down the mechanics. Vow 8 demands secrecy. The lower root fails if they write down the core 3 treasures without the proper ritual context. The middle root fails if they casually broadcast the mind dharma to the public.
Right.
The upper root fails if they speak to the wrong person, or if they speak when the timing and affinity, the yuan, I, are not correct. But then we flip the page to Vow 9, which mandates universal outreach.
A complete opposite.
The lower root fails if they do not guide others to the path, and the upper root fails if they lack universal unconditional compassion or if they fail to adapt to conditions to help all sentient beings.
The tension here is not a flaw in the text. The tension is the curriculum.
I want to push back hard against Vow 8 because in a modern open source world, the concept of keeping spiritual secrets feels incredibly elitist. It reeks of gatekeeping.
I hear that a lot.
If these teachings are truly the medicine that cures human suffering, isn't it profoundly unethical to withhold them from the public? Why can't we just put the heavenly secrets on a massive billboard or a viral video?
Because information without context is not wisdom. It is often destructive. We see this constantly in the secular world. If you take advanced psychological frameworks and dump them out of context onto social media, people weaponize the terminology.
Oh, like therapy speak.
Exactly. They use terms like gaslighting or narcissism to attack their peers rather than to heal.
They turn the medicine into poison because they don't know the dosage.
Precisely. Vow 8 is fundamentally about reverence and responsible stewardship. The core truths of the Dharma are immensely powerful, ego-dissolving concepts.
They aren't toys.
Right. If you deliver them to someone who is entirely consumed by the lower root chaos of the fire-dwelling, someone who has not built the internal gyroscope of sincerity, the knowledge will shatter them. Or worse, they will distort it to serve their ego. You do not pour the entire ocean into a thimble. You drown the thimble, and you disrespect the ocean.
So the upper root's task in vow 8 is hyper-vigilant discernment. They have to read the cosmic readiness, the yuan of the recipient. If the timing is wrong, speaking the ultimate truth is a failure of responsibility.
Yes, it is leaking the secret.
But how does that not paralyze them when facing vow 9? If they're so worried about drowning the thimble, wouldn't they just stop pouring altogether?
Vow 9 prevents the practitioner from using discernment as a convenient excuse for apathy or elitism. You cannot hide in the temple and claim that the masses simply aren't ready. Vow 9 demands active, unconditional compassion. You must be in the fire-dwelling, desperately trying to save people.
How do you practically reconcile the two?
You master the art of translation. You modulate the transmission to match the exact capacity of the receiver. If someone is drowning in the fire-dwelling and they are only ready for a life preserver of basic ethics, the lower root practices, you give them that.
You don't hand them a textbook on fluid dynamics.
You don't try to teach them the fluid dynamics of the ocean while they are drowning. You don't hide the path from them, but you don't overwhelm them with secrets they cannot process. The upper root practitioner lives perfectly on this razor's edge, constantly adapting their compassion to the specific affinity of the moment.
That requires an impossible level of situational awareness, which makes a specific textual quirk in vow 9 incredibly revealing. While reviewing the source text, I noticed a glaring omission.
The missing middle.
Yes. Vow 9 clearly outlines the failure parameters for the lower root. It outlines the failure parameters for the upper root. It completely skips the middle root. It leaves it entirely blank. Why would a highly structured philosophical framework just forget an entire demographic in one specific vow?
It is almost certainly intentional. In ancient philosophical frameworks, a void in the text is often meant to act as a mirror. The transition from the lower root, which is simply trying to recruit people to the community, to the upper root, which embodies formless, perfectly modulated compassion, is the most difficult terrain in the practice. The middle root is caught in the crossfire of the paradox we just discussed.
They understand the grammar, but they are terrified of saying the wrong sentence.
Yes. The middle root practitioner is constantly agonizing over whether to speak up and risk leaking the secret or stay silent and risk hiding the Tao. The text leaves their definition blank because the middle root's practice in this area is entirely situational.
There's no one right answer for them.
Exactly. It cannot be codified. They are in the crucible, making real-time errors, learning through the friction of the fire-dwelling how to balance secrecy and sharing. They are writing their own definition through trial and error.
That is deeply comforting, honestly. It validates the messy middle of the human experience. And this brings us to section 5, the final vow. We have discussed vast, intimidating concepts today. Unshakable stability, preventative repentance, crushing the ego, shouldering the weight of history, and perfectly balancing cosmic secrets with universal compassion.
It's a lot to take in.
At this point, the average listener, the person dealing with a mortgage, a failing relationship, or sheer physical exhaustion, is likely looking for an escape hatch. They're thinking, this is designed for a demigod. I simply cannot meet this standard.
The human mind is brilliant at constructing elaborate justifications for surrender. If the goal seems impossible, we absolve ourselves of the responsibility to try.
And vow number 10 surgically removes that escape hatch. It acts as both the ultimate safety net and the ultimate mirror. Vow 10 is against not doing one's best, or not acting according to capacity.
Pay close attention to the specific phrasing, according to capacity. The vow does not say, against not achieving perfection.
The failures detailed here are devastatingly relatable. Let's start at the bottom. The text states that the lower root fails by deploying excuses. They claim they are too busy.
The classic excuse.
They say the teachings are too difficult to understand. They argue they have no time to listen, no time to practice, and they neglect even the most basic physical rituals, like offering incense or showing up to the community.
I don't have time. It is the universal mantra of the modern age. But time is never a matter of availability. It is purely a metric of priority. What vow 10 says to the lower root is, stop lying.
Stop lying.
You have the capacity to do something. Even if it is merely 5 minutes of quiet reflection in your car before walking into work. To claim you possess zero capacity is a catastrophic failure of honesty.
It calls out the avoidance mechanisms directly, but the description of the middle root failure, this part stopped me cold. It is poetic, and it is a tragedy that defines our current cultural moment.
It really hits close to home.
The text says the middle root fails by becoming entangled in emotional shackles. They fail by treating fame and wealth as precious, vital commodities. And by doing so, they let beautiful opportunities and good times flow away like water, lingering in false comfort and missing the critical moment of their lives.
It reads like a psychological autopsy of the modern professional class.
It really does. We shackle ourselves to endless emotional dramas, office politics, social media algorithms, toxic relationships. We treat our LinkedIn profiles, our status symbols, and our bank accounts as the most critical aspects of reality. We obsessively optimize our careers.
Always optimizing.
And while we are staring at our screens, the beautiful opportunities, the chance for deep, unbroken connection with our children, the chance for profound internal peace, the opportunity to truly understand our own minds, flow right past us like water. We waste the finite, irreplaceable currency of our lives lingering in the air-conditioned comfort of the fire dwelling.
And what makes the middle root's failure so tragic is that they possess the intellect to know better.
That's the painful part.
The lower root might genuinely be ignorant, but the middle root understands the teachings. They know the fame and wealth are empty, yet they lack the willpower to break the emotional shackles. They negotiate with their own potential, trading ultimate liberation for temporary social validation. They simply refuse to do their best.
Which brings us to the ultimate existential standard, the upper root. The text states the upper root fails if they cannot break the final, subtle attachments to self and reality. They fail if they cannot eliminate deep-seated karma, and if they cannot realize the ultimate truth, he is.
For the upper root, the safety nets are gone. The only acceptable standard is total ontological liberation. If you possess the capacity to pierce the final illusion of reality, and you hesitate because you're attached to the concept of your own enlightenment, you have failed the vow.
But the underlying grace of this entire framework resides in that single phrase, according to capacity. The universe, or the Tao, is not grading the lower root practitioner against the standard of the upper root master.
The synthesis of the three roots framework is one of profound, radical fairness.
The vow does not demand that the person struggling to pay rent and manage a toddler instantly dissolve their karma and achieve wu-wei. It does not expect the student learning basic vocabulary to spontaneously compose a masterpiece. It simply demands that the lower root stop making excuses about being too busy to reflect for 5 minutes.
It demands 100% effort, but it demands that effort only within the boundaries of your current capacity.
Right.
If you're operating at the lower root, you must deploy 100% of your lower root energy. If you are a middle root, you must give everything you have to identifying and breaking those emotional shackles. You are judged solely against the delta of your own potential in this exact microsecond.
It completely removes the crushing guilt of not being perfectly enlightened while simultaneously holding your feet to the fire to execute the exact work you know you are capable of doing right now. You cannot hide behind the impossibility of perfection.
And this structural genius leads us directly into the conclusion of the source document.
The text wraps up its argument with a definitive statement on action. It says that making a vow requires fulfilling the vow. Theoretical practice is an illusion.
It'd have to be real.
To practice the vow brings true cultivation. To actually fulfill it leads to true attainment. Because disciples possess drastically different roots, backgrounds, and understandings, as we have spent this hour exploring, their paths through the fire dwelling will look entirely different. But the ultimate objective for every single practitioner, regardless of their current root, is to open the eyes of the great vow mind and actualize its true meaning.
To open the eyes of the great vow mind is the transition from mechanical obedience to luminous understanding. It is no longer about checking boxes on a spiritual to-do list.
Right, it's not a checklist.
It is about viewing the entirety of existence through the lens of that ultimate commitment. The vow ceases to be something you do and becomes the very structure of how you see.
Let's synthesize the sheer scale of the landscape we have covered today. We began by stepping willingly into the chaotic, burning reality of the fire dwelling, rejecting the urge to retreat to an isolated mountaintop. We learned to calibrate an internal gyroscope of sincerity, maintaining absolute stability whether we are being battered by tragedy or praised by the crowd.
We fundamentally redefined repentance, moving away from the retroactive guilt of a committed sin and moving toward a state of preventative mindfulness that refuses to let the seeds of harm germinate.
We analyze the sophisticated traps of the ego, realizing that performative, aesthetic spirituality is a dead end. We confronted the terrifying physical reality that in a high-entropy world, standing still and resting on our laurels is the exact equivalent of sliding backward.
We learn to honor the lineage, not by worshiping the personalities of the past or engaging in institutional tribalism, but by shouldering the brutal weight of the truth and carrying that fire forward.
We navigated the impossible catch-22 of esoteric knowledge, learning to balance the reverence required to protect profound secrets with the unconditional compassion required to save the people around us. And finally, we faced the mirror of Vow 10, stripping away the sophisticated excuses of our modern hustle culture, demanding of ourselves that we execute our absolute best effort based strictly on the capacity we currently possess.
It is, without exaggeration, a complete architectural blueprint for navigating the human condition.
And the most vital takeaway for you listening to this deep dive is the profound patience built into the system. You do not have to be an upper root master today. You are not required to exhibit perfect, effortless non-action by tomorrow morning.
Thank goodness.
Spiritual evolution, personal growth, and psychological maturity are simply about ruthlessly and honestly diagnosing where you are right now and fulfilling the specific, granular requirements of that exact level.
The universe forgives your current limitations. The only true failure is the refusal to walk the specific stretch of the path you are currently standing on.
As we conclude today's exploration, I want to leave you with a concrete framework to take back out into the fire dwelling. The text demands that we open the eyes of the great vow mind. I want you to mentally isolate the single most important commitment you hold in your life right now.
Just one commitment.
It might be a formal spiritual vow. It might be the commitment you made to your spouse, the vision you have for your career, or a private promise you made to yourself regarding your physical or mental health. Apply this ancient 3-tier diagnostic tool to that specific commitment. Where are you actually operating?
Be honest.
Are you currently functioning at the lower behavioral level, just going through the motions, performing for an audience, and constantly deploying excuses about how you simply don't have the time? Are you at the middle ethical level, understanding all the rules and theories flawlessly, but allowing yourself to be bound by emotional shackles, chasing temporary status, while the beautiful, irreplaceable opportunities of your life flow away like water?
Or are you higher?
Or are you pushing into the upper philosophical territory, acting with unshakable sincerity, entirely unmoved by external chaos or praise, actively carrying the historical burden of the work forward without a single thought of retreat? Take a brutally honest look at that commitment. And more importantly, if you stripped away every single excuse you're currently using to defend your stagnation, which level are you actually capable of executing tomorrow?
That is the only question that matters.
It is. Thank you for joining us in the deep dive. We'll see you next time.